up for the Spanish market. I wanted to just speak a moment about Hoopla education and what we do and who we are, and how, and this will help give you information about how the garden project came to be and really the core aspects of the program. Um, we have, just by looking at the logo, we use a puzzle as our main component, and the puzzle represents the collaboration that we foster in all our curricula between activities and also classrooms, but also what we're doing is we're connecting the project-based learning framework with the STEAM disciplines. And I'll talk about that in a little more detail in a few slides down. Our focus is we have a snail in our logo. So the snail represents slowing things down and nature-inspired activities. So we believe that it's really fundamental for the children to have the time to really um, uh, integrate the concepts and the learning as much as possible. And as educators, it's our role to slow that process down as opposed to be providing more and more information, which is something that we see is happening more and more in schools, in school environment. And then you'll notice that the snail is stylized. So we apply the spiral learning. It's process driven, and what that means is that a concept will be revisited multiple times throughout the child's uh, academic career as they're doing the garden project, but it's revisited in a scaffolded way, so with more and more complex ideas. But the whole philosophy is we really want to give the children time to process the information and revisit it as they get older and get a more complex idea of the concept. So the Garden Project, for those of you who are new to it, is a 3-level English language teaching course for the pre-primary age group, so the 3 to 6. And children are learning English by growing their own garden in the box and documenting findings and their learnings through student journals, which are subdivided into 3 levels: wonder, observation, and investigation. And in Spain or non-English speaking countries where the program has been adopted as an ELT course, we really focus on this whole CLIL, teaching English through this CLIL environment and linking it with these scientific concepts. All right. So essentially, there were quite a number of aspects of let's say, influences that came into being or were applied when we put the garden project together. The first was the use of outdoor education and the importance of making children's environment as interactive as possible, but really making it integrated as part of the children's learning experience. We had been traveling extensively to and visiting preschools around the world, and all too often we found that there was this sort of set curriculum where children all over were doing snowmen in December and pumpkins end of October, beginning of November, with scarecrows, no matter where they were in the world. And so we were seeing snowmen in Hong Kong, and scarecrows and pumpkins in Qatar, where there was definitely a disassociation between the children's natural environment and what they were learning. So we felt like it was really important for us to connect children with the outdoors. Also, with the growing urbanization, we saw that less and less time was being spent outside. So we thought it was really important to find a way to get children to be more connected with their immediate and natural environment, and and really base a lot of the learning from that, from those direct experiences. We also found that the outdoors contextualized learning, in that learning is a lot more active and less abstract, focusing on a practical knowledge as opposed to some concept that might be used in the future. It also facilitates a lot of a diversified way of learning. So you're using pretty much all the senses, from smelling, tasting, because we have a lot of food-related activities, the sensory component, the visual, and the listening. So it was such a beautiful way to really integrate learning as much as possible. Um, One other aspect that also heavily influenced the creation of the garden project was this growing movement of the forest schools, particularly at preschool age in the UK. We spent a period of time in the UK and were fascinated how much children learned in sort of natural forest type environments, and how that being outdoors really contributes to a child's harmonic development. So we wanted to capture that as much as possible, understanding that realistically we can't always bring all the education outside. But I'll show you how we actually brought some of these elements into the classroom through the garden project. Um, the key methodology and approach that was adopted for the garden project is the project-based learning approach. And project-based learning is a dynamic approach in which students take a problem, a challenge, and actually the problem or challenge is proposed by the teacher, and there's a whole inquiry that is driven by the children to really develop the skills around the inquiry, and make that learning as active as possible for the children and for the students. This very much bases itself on the scientific method, and essentially the children or the students are involved with the documentation and then the sharing of their findings as they're learning about a given concept through the inquiry process. So what we did was we took this concept and we applied it to something very specific and tied to nature, so that every child is, or every lesson, it opens up with what we defined as our green question. The Our Green question becomes the opening inquiry, setting the stage for each lesson that the child does, and then that inquiry is developed through the STEAM framework. So what the STEAM framework does, STEAM is an acronym for science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And what the children are doing is they're investigating that Our Green question inquiry through those various disciplines so that they're getting a holistic outlook and view of the answer or that inquiry of the green question. So I'll make it very specific and concrete. I'll give you an example. The opening lesson for the garden project as a foundational unit is the exploration of seasons. And so the question, the our green question is, why is it important to know what season we're in? And the children are guided through this inquiry in the exploration of various other disciplines. So from the scientific point of view, they're exploring the, the seasonality and the patterns in weather, actually patterns in weather. From an artistic point of view, they're brought outside and they're invited to collect the colors that they notice outside. So that's the artistic point of view. Um, and the technology is used to record and find devices to collect this data. And so all these different smaller child-led inquiries from the STEAM are applying the STEAM framework to have a better understanding of that our green question inquiry that opens the lesson, the learning for each lesson. We were also very inspired by the Reggio Emilia approach that uses the environment as the third educator and also allows children to express themselves through a variety of languages, not so much as in verbal languages, but their own way of expressing themselves. It might be visual or orally or kinesthetically with movement. And so we integrated a variety of ways for the children to learn within the curriculum. So concretely, what are we doing in the garden project? The garden project follows a cyclical aspect of particularly of growing seasonal fruit and vegetables, starting with the foundational unit where children are learning about colors through the observation of the colors that make up the season. They're talking about weather, they're talking about different seeds, parts of the plant, and recyclability. This becomes the foundational unit that will then carry them to unit 2, that is also preparing them for that very important moment of planting their garden in the box. Before they plant their garden in the box, we're talking about soil, the different textures of soil. We're talking about the synergies that exist between plants, and the fact that if you plant certain plants together, companion planting, they'll do better than if you plant them with others. Taking them to the point where they then plant their garden in the box with another 4 to 5 children. So we encourage the teacher to make more than one garden in the box per class and have 4 to 5 other children working together to plant the seedlings of seasonal fruit and vegetables. That will then lead to the discovery and the exploration of the plants and how they grow, and documenting that growth and the various stages of a plant. So Unit 3 is all about growing. Unit 4 carries the children into the unit about healthy eating, and this is where we've associated many of the recipes, local recipes, to foods and fruit and vegetables that you would eat in Spain. We quote gazpacho. We have quite a number of nice recipes that are typical from Spain. And then that carries us to the last unit, which is that one of decomposing and regeneration. So ultimately, a plant's goal is to create a seed, and the seed is there is to continue its own life and its own life cycle, and for it to all start all over again. Let me just make sure, is everybody hearing me? Yes, okay. Okay, good. I'll go back to my presentation. All right. Okay. So what's so beautiful about the whole framework is the fact that we're making this learning experience extremely tangible and extremely concrete. And the very seed of that knowledge becomes the foundation for the following year, the subsequent year. So that seed that is produced from the fruit and vegetables that are cultivated in the garden in the box will then become the new learning experience for the following year, or even passed on maybe to the younger age group that will then, be starting their own garden in the box, their own cycle the following year. So it really makes that whole learning experience extremely tangible. It also allows for there to be many connections with other departments and other areas, and to make that learning experience as real as possible for the children. We've also so we have essentially 3 levels of content. And actually what I just realized, I'm going to make a quick variation here. Remembered that Sheena gave me feedback on that. Essentially, there are 3 levels. So the first level is the level of wonder. And the goal here is for the children to really feel connected to nature's magic and wonder. And with the essential elements that make up our natural environment. That then moves on to observation. As the children have bonded and connected with nature, they're developing their observational skills and really learning to appreciate what their natural environment has to offer. And then the third level is investigation. And the investigation essentially with children are learning that by manipulating or making a small variation in one or more variables, they might have completely different results. So they're starting to develop those investigative skills. And these age ranges are really, again, these are mainly indicative. Although Sheena will be able to speak to you in just a moment about how these are working in Spain with the various ages. But we found that the reason that there is an age range is primarily having to do with the children's level of English. So if they're not as familiar with English, then we recommend for them to do to start the level with a slightly older age child.
Sorry, Angelica, sorry to interrupt you. You know you are not sharing your screen.
Oh, no, I didn't realize.
Yeah, so I was thinking that maybe you stop sharing and then you haven't come back.
Oh. Sorry about that. Okay, here we go. Can you see it now? Are you able to?
Yes, 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 we see it perfectly now.
Okay, okay, thanks, Beatrice. Yes, so here are you can see the three levels. So wonder, observation, and investigation, and we'll be talking about that. We'll give you some more concrete examples of how those have worked in Spain and how they change according to the age range. So yes, so what are some of the obstacles that we had experienced and really motivated us to create the garden project? Well, we saw that there was with the growing urbanization, there is a lack of external spaces for schools to use the outdoors, making it harder for children to really be acquainted with nature. And so our big motivation with the creation of the garden in the box was to overcome those external barriers and show all stakeholders, so show our children, teachers, and parents, and school directors, that you really don't need a big space in order to grow your own fruit and vegetables. Generally, the box is it is a 30 by 20 by 20 centimeter size box. I'm going to show you the video in just a moment, so you can see how the children come together to make the garden in the box. In the case of in Spain, Macmillan Education has made a beautiful box that goes with the kit that the teachers can use as their garden in the box with the children. But it doesn't mean that you cannot use the outdoors if you have the outdoors. The garden in the box becomes the element for children to observe their growing fruit and vegetables from close by, and really becomes a living resource and a living lab, almost like scientific lab for them to watch from close by. And I think nothing tells it better than the video. So I have a little video I wanted to share with you of what it looks like for children to be working together and making a garden in the box. Hopefully you can see the video. If you have trouble with the video quality, just let me know and I'll pause it. Oops.
The goals for this activity are for children to learn patience, they will learn empathy for nature's creatures, plants, and they will learn collaboration because they will have to work with each other in order to make the English garden. And then, of course, the main goal is to introduce English in a new context. You would need a box. We usually use wooden boxes because they look really nice. And then you would need a plastic sheet so the soil doesn't come out. You will need some soil, some good garden soil, and the plants you want to plant. And usually we also use some small plastic cups that children use to put the soil in the box. The idea of this project is that everybody can have a small garden inside, indoors, without having a garden. Salads, greens, usually they need less sun than than plants that will produce fruit, like the tomatoes, for example. But I guess a couple of hours a day would be needed.
Okay. Yes, I wanted to show you so you get a chance to see concretely what it means for the children to be working together and making their garden in the box. The other really important aspect of the garden project and the use of living organisms to foster that learning experience is it's developing skills like patience, communication, and cooperation that are inherent with growing your own fruit and vegetables. We are also very conscious of the fact that as much as possible, we want to promote a sense of recycling and repurposing items so that children are really thinking and developing those attitudes that contribute to a sustainable way of life. So, for example, one of the opening units in our opening lessons in the first unit talks about repurposing materials such as plastic bottles or cups or even cans, being very conscious and aware of the safety component. But how could you repurpose those materials and items that you have in your recycling bin for a different use? And so we want to really make that part of that kind of mindset of recycling and repurposing very much part of children's education. We also we also make use of organic materials as much as possible because organic materials carry so many learning opportunities with them. And if we can teach our children that that nature already provides us with all all the questions, but also all of the answers with it, then we're also providing children with a very fascinating world to be a part of. One of the questions that we often get is like, so how long does the garden project last? And I'm sharing a calendar that we suggest, but then maybe Sheena can speak also about how things are done in Spain. But essentially the way let me go back to, I'm not as well versed. Okay, but essentially we suggest, first of all, there's no specific, you have to do this within this specific time frame. The whole concept of calling it the garden project is that it really becomes a project that is tailored to the teachers and the children's needs and can fluctuate depending on how engaged they are with a specific part of the curriculum as opposed to another. Generally speaking, we suggest for that first preparation, the preparing unit to be covered over in the autumn/winter, for planting to happen at the very end of winter, beginning of spring, for the growing to happen during spring, and the harvest to happen at the end of spring, beginning of summer, simply because logistically it's also the easiest. And then the last unit to be done between the end of spring and beginning of summer. But once again, it's a project, and we adopted the project-based learning framework specifically because we wanted to offer that kind of flexibility to the teachers. Did you want to say anything, Sheena?
Sure. So just to give a few examples of how I've seen this, how some schools have set this up. Well, really, the preparing stage, there's actually quite a lot of great stuff there that overlaps with what you're probably going to be what you're probably doing anyway at that time of year, because between the beginning of the school year and Christmas, there's so many kind of interruptions. You've got the period of adaptation, all of that to consider. So it's a really nice time to introduce some basics: seasons, weather, colors, and I think teachers really get going after Christmas, and they need to kind of go over some of the basics from the preparation stage in January, and beyond that. But like Angelica said, it really is, the project becomes each school's own project because of the way that they decide to implement it. It's really nice at the end of the year, for example. It's a nice way to wrap up the year by harvesting your own vegetables or fruit, maybe having a little activity like making a salad or doing something to celebrate what's been done. It fits in nicely with the school calendar. But how long you spend on each unit really depends on how deep really you're going to go into the project. So for younger pupils, for example, who are doing Wonder, within the project itself, there is more of a focus with preparation and with the growing. And as the children get older, as Angelica mentioned at the beginning, this is it's spiral learning. So they are repeating the same kind of concepts of preparing, growing, planting over the course of the 3 years. But each year they go in a little bit more, and definitely with the older children, there's more focus on the later units as well, because they have already developed a lot of knowledge about preparing, what plants need, how to look after their plants. I hope that maybe give you a
Yes.
little bit more information.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Great, thank you so much. Okay, so just want to put it back here. Okay. So we touched upon the fact that for us it was really important to localize that learning experience as much as possible, and also fostering that connection and understanding between food and culture by referencing the local recipes. So we've got our gazpacho or seasonal salads that are linked to what would be available in Spain. And that for us is a really key component of the garden project. And one of the reasons why the garden project was actually awarded the Eltons Award this year was because of that sensitivity towards the localization of the material. There's some also wonderful references to seasonal festivities. I wonder, I know that Sheena was mentioning that one of her schools connected it to the Chestnut Festival. Is there anything you'd like to mention about that?
Yeah, just a teacher in Galicia told me about how the school celebrates this every year anyway, and they were able to link that nicely. And there's a lot that they can do with those with chestnuts. And another teacher told me about how they used pumpkin seeds after Halloween to do some of the, they adapted some of the activities. So in Wonder, the journal, there's a sunflower seed art activity. And rather than using sunflower seeds, they decided to use some pumpkin seeds that they had left over from Halloween. So that was a way that, that it was adapted.
Fantastic. Yeah, so we also are encouraging teachers as much as possible to explore their natural surrounding habitats. So whenever possible, we realize that it's not always possible to go outdoors and take the learning outdoors, but we have included very specific activities and also guidelines to support that learning, that the teacher be able to go outside and really experience the outdoors as a living classroom, exploring the local flora and fauna, and also encouraging teachers to talk about as much as possible about biodiversity and the natural equilibrium. So we have a beautiful unit about the creatures of the garden. And so the children are learning about earthworms, and they're learning about ladybirds and bees, as well as also other pests that exist in the garden. But the fundamental concept is that all our plants would not be able to even exist if it weren't for the interaction with other creatures, other insects, and that they really live together in this equilibrium and this harmony. So that is a really important component of the garden project. I know that Sheena touched upon it. I chose this picture of planting lettuce because I know she has a really lovely example of how it was linked, of how the garden project was linked with the whole school initiative. Sheena, would you like to share about that?
Yeah. Sure. Just that really. A teacher was telling me that the whole school went out to the garden to plant lettuce, and then they used that to, I think I just mentioned it, they made a salad after, and that was a nice activity that they did. Often there's whole school projects, so the garden project fits in nicely with some of the big topics that schools might be looking at, for example, water. Something else, well, yes, I mean, it's also a great opportunity to overlap with what's being learned in their own language, and as much as possible, if to link that with the garden project with something like water, or if they're studying plants or something like that.
Fantastic. Yes, so we want to make those learning experiences as concrete and tangible as possible, and linking it to as many other learning experiences that are happening in the classroom or in their class. One really lovely component of the garden project is this focus on the multi-sensory aspect of it, and the fact that you're able to involve younger age children at already at age 3 in that learning process, because you're using such tangible and concrete manipulatives. And did you want to talk about how what kind of adaptations we made for Spain in this area?
Sure. Just with some of the younger pupils, there's a chance to use a lot of the tactile materials, for example, things that they already probably use in the pre-primary classroom, lots of seeds, beans. There's some activities where they're using mud for brave teachers, and they're creating art with that. Also things to do with sound, rhythm, using seeds to make musical instruments, looking at how different size beans, for example, make different noises. So there can be, with the younger children, definitely a focus on some of the more tactile activities.
Fantastic. Also, in terms of going back and seeing what's worked and what doesn't work, Sheena, would you like to talk about having a champion and how that's really helped with the implementation of the program?
Sure. Something that we found is that it's helpful if within a department or a year group that there's somebody who is championing this project, because it does take extra effort to do something like this. It's extra work, and it can be a little bit daunting sometimes if you have no knowledge of gardening, for example. Maybe you don't know where to begin. So having a little bit of help or somebody taking charge, if there's somebody within the department who does have a little bit of experience with gardening, or who does, sometimes even within the educational community. So parents, grandparents, I've heard of in some schools, maybe other teachers who work in a different department. Maybe in some schools, if you're lucky enough to have a garden, and there are a lot of gardens in pre-primary schools and primary schools, having somebody who's willing to spend some time to take care of that, that really helps. But for those who don't have somebody to help with that, something nice about this project is starting small. You don't need to have a full garden straight away. Just start with a cup, some soil, and a seed, and learn together. And as Angelica often mentions, part of the beautiful thing about this is failure. Sometimes plants don't grow, and that's an opportunity to learn. So I think that's something to bear in mind, to start small if at first, not be overly ambitious. And within the program, there is support of seasonality, how to pick crops or things to grow, how long things need to grow, how to plan ahead.
Yeah, that's a great example you gave. And also, I think as teachers, going back to what I had mentioned at the beginning, we often think that we always have to propose new content and new material to our children. And there's a real value to repetition, especially with the younger age, but all ages, but especially with the younger age. They're already stimulated and bombarded with so much new information and so much going on, that actually having the comfort of repeating. So if you do have a chance and you do repeat it multiple years, try running the planting the same things in your box. And actually, there's something very comforting for the children to be able to already recognize some of those little seedlings that they might not have known the first time they did it, but then they recognize it the second time, and the third time they do it, they'll actually be able to interact with the project even more. So, don't shy away from repeating, because that repetition is really key for children. And then the use of the journals is extremely appealing. The journals component is where every child has a journal according to their age range. it'll vary between the 3 levels that we looked at. And what those journals do is it formalizes those gardening activities, or really their learning experience, because it allows children to be able to connect one experience with the next. And they have great satisfaction in being able to go back and really see that whole learning experience in one place. We were really conscious about making that journal as beautiful as possible, because we believe that beautiful aesthetic deliverables help also in and support that learning experience. So it's the journals are really a key component of that. And I know we have, so I ended this with the girl with the ladybug or ladybird on her nose, just to remind us of that, the magic of nature and how everything begins and ends with nature, and it being such a natural learning framework for us to apply, particularly in the early years. I know we have like a few minutes, and I wanted to sort of. Oh, I don't. Sheena, did you have anything else you wanted to share?
I just made a few notes of some of the ways to support language learning during the garden project, which is really, I think it's quite key here. So something that we found is that this is really a new methodology, and it's important that teachers still can incorporate some of their own teaching style and continue to use the techniques that they use normally. So, for example, well, Hoopla created some really beautiful flashcards and posters after some teacher feedback was that they really wanted to still use flashcard games. So they have beautiful photographic flashcards to use, and some posters, because these are concepts, the more visuals, the better here. So there's so just using your normal flashcard game techniques with this, with some of the vocabulary, for example, is really helpful. Also, routines. There's so many routines that teachers in pre-primary will be doing anyway, that fit in so nicely with the garden project. Because there's so much overlap with things like the weather, with colors, with feelings. I mean, there is a real social and emotional learning thread through this project. And so things like that are incorporated. So what you might be teaching in normal English classes, when you're doing the garden project, you're reinforcing it because you can bring that in. Concepts, big, small, hard, soft, looking at textures. And the added benefit is just it's so tangible because they can see, they have these, the children have access in the classroom to the living lab where they can see examples of some of the concepts. Something else that teachers have told me that they, that fits in very well, and there is also a link within the project, is to stories. Stories that you would tell in pre-primary, for example, The Biggest Turnip, Jack and the Beanstalk. Those are some other examples. And something very important that that we have is also the family booklet. There's one component to the project, which is it's a booklet for the families where it's in Spanish, so that they can really understand what's going on in each unit, so they can help and support that at home. And there's some activities there also per unit that parents can do at home. So those are a few added things that I thought were worth mentioning, so that yes, this is something that's different. It's a project-based learning, you're using a project-based learning framework, but there's a lot of flexibility there to use a lot of teaching techniques and methodology that you already use. So.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sheena.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Yes, so we have a couple minutes for...
Yes. So first of all, thank you very much for such an interesting presentation. Thanks to Hoopla Education and Macmillan Education Iberia for having accepted presenting this, participating in this webinar. And I may think that many people may have many questions, so please just connect your microphones, and we can start some debate, or as you prefer. Any question? Anna Otto, do you want to?
Yeah, please. Thank you. Thank you so much, Beatriz. Well, thank you both for the wonderful materials you have presented today, and the opportunity you bring in us to know them. Well, I loved them. To be honest. I love them because they are very hands-on and very practical. Also because they can be adapted to many different types of intelligences and kids and ages and everything. I especially enjoyed the connection with local cultures and recipes, ideas, and so on. I also loved how it could also be connected with other parts of the curricula, because I guess this is very necessary in today's education, at least in Spain, when we don't really have this idea of connecting different parts of the areas in infant education. And I loved the journals at the very end of it, because they are so tangible, and it is something that students can enjoy as well. It is something that they can benefit from the help of a teacher. And an aspect which is also very important, it is something that parents can see, because sometimes parents do not really know about what our children are doing in the class, especially when we're talking about infant pre-primary education, pre-primary levels. So congratulations, you both. I have one question. I'm wondering to what extent students would be allowed to use the L1, the mother tongue, if possible. Is it possible? Are they always, I don't want to say forced, but encouraged to use the foreign language, English, or can they use the L1 at some specific times? Thank you.
Sheena, should I sort of... I'll give a comment from the theoretical point of view of how we conceived it, and then Sheena will give a concrete example of Spain. I think that would work the best. So as much as possible, our goal is engaging the children in that learning experience. So if the children are so engaged where they're naturally using their L1, their native language, it means that the first and most important step has been taken of really marrying the child with the methodology of what's happening. Then it's really for the teacher's role and job to reinforce the L2, the English language learning component, as much as possible. And there is a list for every single lesson, a list of key vocabulary. So there is a vocabulary focus for every lesson that is highlighted and identified for the teacher. And those are going to be the key words to be focusing on in those various lessons. So, colors for the, seasonality or weather, size for seeds, length and measurement. So these are all also language focuses that we have identified in each lesson.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
And then Sheena will give you from a perspective in Spain.
Well, I was just going to agree with you, Angelica. I think that language really shouldn't be a barrier here. And of course, just the children are engaged with the material. Something I didn't mention before is just how, a project like this, children are going to learn a lot of incidental language. A lot more language is going to be coming out of this, and just how important asking questions is. And I think that if the children are using their own language, I don't see that as a problem. It's up to the teacher um, to rephrase that or to help them along. Um,
And one element of the garden project that we didn't mention is that we have a partnership with the vegetable plot. And the vegetable plot is a music CD that accompanies the project. It's a band from Australia that sings about healthy eating. And their main character is an asparagus, or Gus for short. And he always gives examples of why it's important to eat healthily and eat vegetables and keep planting them. So that also accompanies the project. And the reason why we incorporated the music component is because we firmly believe in the importance of music in this, at this, particularly this age group. So there's a lot of dancing music and a lot of fun.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anna, for your question. Any other question? Anyone? Carmen Ramos, I think she raised her hands.
Yes, hi. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for your presentation. I have two questions for you. The first one is which kind of schools have adopted this method? Which are the ones who have joined to your project? Are they private or are they public? Because I'm thinking about the budget. You need the resources you have to do in order to implement this project in the school.
I'll let
So-
you take that one.
Thanks for your question. The garden project has been adopted into actually all different types of schools, public, private, and concertado schools. We've seen a real variety. So it's not just we've seen it really embraced in all different types of schools. Some schools maybe already had a running garden. Some didn't. Some had gardens that were in disuse. But something that's part of the project is really how to use resources that don't cost a lot of money to get the project going, to reuse what you have. I don't know if that's answered your question at all.
Yeah. The thing is that the images you show, well, Angelica shows in the picture, I saw the type of chairs, the tables and all those things. I have not seen that in Spain or even in Andalusia, where I have been working.
Carmen, I showed you the nicest ones, especially for the presentation.
Okay, and the second question is about the number of students that each teacher has in the classroom. How many students that the teacher have in the classroom? Yeah.
So yeah, there's generally speaking, it can depend. So it can go from 10 all the way up to in the 20s. And it really is up to how the school is set up to organize the class. We generally recommend, if it's possible, to split for certain activities, not all, but some of the activities to split the kids into smaller groups, just because they'll get more out of it than if you're running it with the entire group at one time. Sheena, did you want to add about what you've experienced in Spain?
Yeah, it just really varies. I mean, if a class has 25 pupils, then you run the project with the amount of pupils that you have, and you work with the resources you have and divide it up as you can. That's really up to the teacher. There's
And
no,
Mike,
it's not set in stone. I think you have to be realistic of what you can do, and in that way just work with what you have and the resources you have. If you need extra help for activities, if there's you know, it's always lovely to work, as Angelica mentioned in the presentation, with other departments if possible. If you have you know, work with the the teacher, the class teacher, or also if you're going outside, volunteers, parents, for example, or if you can't go outside and it's not realistic to work with a guard in the box, some teachers have used individual egg cartons and worked in a smaller scale. So you just do what you can, I think.
okay.
Yeah,
Thank.
and just to add to that, Carmen, the one of the best things that I have a PhD research professor. Actually, she's in China. She also has started her own preschool, and she had started a whole association of bringing quality education to rural environments. And one of the things that she loved about the garden project was that it supported using those very basic and natural materials in a more formalized educational context and just giving value to that. And I think that yes, you're right, the environment, the pictures of what you saw and the photographs that we use are the very fancy, nice schools. But the beauty of this program is that it really values the simple, very low cost materials to bring high quality education.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
I don't know if there is any other question. Anyone, come on, you want to share something or just give your opinion, the possibilities of implementing this project where you work? Anyone?
Yes, I've got another question.
Carmen,
Thinking
go
about
ahead.
thinking about the sorry because I cannot turn off my camera. And the question is connected also with the use of the language. Does the well, I suppose that the teachers has a certain level of English. So the tutor or the person who is running this project in the school has you know, a certification, or is there any other language teacher who supports the tutor or the person in charge of the group? I don't know how you manage that.
I think it's just the teacher of the class is the one who's going to lead to go through this project with the child. So if it's I don't think that you need a special level of English.
Mm-hmm.
The level to normally teach English is, I think, more than it's enough to work through this project.
Okay,
Can
thank you.
maybe I add something to this, as you know, I work on that field, on teacher training and all that. Sometimes we have the wrong idea that in order to teach English to preschoolers, we need just a very basic level of English, and it is the other way around completely.
Yeah.
Because what we want is to expose the students to rich linguistic experiences, and I think in that sense, this project really may work a lot. So because what you are doing is exposing children to projects that they may feel very motivated for the project, for creating this garden, for observing, for looking at the nature, for, even though, you know, getting dirty, this is something that kids love. So while they are so much motivated on doing all that, you may need to expose kids to language and to this. So the richer the exposure to the language that you give to students, the more learning of English is going to be. So it's very important that teachers, either whether it is the English teacher who gets into the preschool, or whether it is the preschool teacher with a good level of English, but both, either of them, they need to have a good level of English, so that this project or any approach in the English class has really is successful. So Carmen, my advice is whenever I work with a school in order to implement this kind of project or a key project or something, you really need to have teachers who are well trained in English as well as in teaching how to teach English. Okay, but English is essential part. So you really need to have teachers who are who has a good level of English, of course.
I do agree with you. I have experienced myself that, and
Yeah.
it's really important.
It is. I was going to, and I think Sheena may be able more to ask me this question. I was going to ask you, from your experience implementing this project in different schools in Spain, how, I mean, what's the feedback you have had from teachers? Was it difficult to implement? Because as I see it, I think we changed from a linear modality in unit 1, unit 2, unit 3 to this circular modality that Angelica was explaining to us, where we've got 6 units, but in a way you can always go back to 1 unit or increase 1 unit. So it's a completely different structure as the one we are used to in most textbooks, in most English materials. So was that difficult to, I don't know, to get teachers to understand that, to implement that? That was my question.
Yeah, I think that it definitely in certain schools, well, not just certain schools, just in general, this is a really innovative methodology in pre-primary, and there's you've got the project-based learning framework, you've got STEAM, there's and marrying that with learning English also. So there were certain things that we did to try and bridge a gap with teachers and help them along. Like I mentioned before, originally the project didn't have flashcards, and that was something that was added to it because teachers really wanted that. They missed that because that is such an important component in pre-primary. Also the posters. So Hoopla created these really beautiful posters, lots of visuals and charts and things like that. And also something else that I can mention is with the journals. I noticed, speaking to some schools at first, they were teaching from the journals, because if you're used to teaching with a course book, you might just use the course book, especially if you're an experienced teacher and you're not going to maybe use the teacher's book as much as possible. When you use the garden project, it's important to use the teacher's manual at first, because otherwise you're not going to even get a fraction of the benefits. You can't teach from the journals. They're just one part of it. So that was something I found, that you kind of had to change the chip a little bit about the way some teachers approached it. So those were a few examples that I can share with you.
Thanks. Anyone else wants to share something, or no one else?
Yes, hello, Beatriz.
Yeah, please.
Hello. I want to say thank you for to the speakers. I really appreciate your presentation. And I would like to ask you one question, that is, if you have a blog or a website or social media where you're showing all your materials, all these journals you've been talking about. I mean, any any place where you are sharing online everything that you've been explaining?
So Macmillan has their website. Do you want to talk about what you have available in
Sure.
Spain?
So we've got we have some information on our website about the project, and also some there's an Instagram also with some photos, and that's what we've got. There's no blog though, but
Oh, God. So you have a website?
so we have some information about the garden project on our website, and then Hoopla, of course, have lots of information on their website about the project, the history behind it, and different. Well, Angelica, you can explain.
Yeah, we like to keep our Instagram page current, and we're constantly fascinated by the whole nature world. And yesterday, for example, we spent the morning with two beekeepers, and we shared our knowledge and experience about that on our Instagram page. So let's say some of the new things that are coming out are on really mainly on the Instagram page as Hoopla Education. But if you wanted to purchase any of the journals or the program, then that would be through Macmillan Spain.
Oh, okay. Okay. And I would like to ask you also if this project allows you to work on written language, like written language in the second language.
So if there's a written component to the project, is that what the question is?
I mean, are you working with written language in the second language?
Yes, and let's say that the written component is the most in level 3, so the investigation level of the journal. A lot of our activities involve are manual activities, so children are using their fingers, a lot of finger painting, a lot of gluing, cutting. Well, of course, all the planting component, but related to the journals, they're very hands-on. Although we do have a written component primarily for level 3 in the investigation level.
There's some opportunity for children to record the new vocabulary they learnt, and label things. This was something that it's at the back of the journal, because not all schools are going to be writing. So at the back there is section for recording new vocabulary, for example.
Okay.
But it's not an obligatory part of the project.
Okay, thank you very much.
We must think that in the preschool stage we should focus mainly on oracy, so written skills may come later. So if we extend maybe into primary, it would make more sense to work with written work there. I think if we are thinking about the first years of preschool, mostly oral English will be the key to develop the skills, right?
Actually, one of the changes that Sheena's team had recommended, the journals originally have, or the ones that we have in other countries, a grid with like a square background. And one of the first things that the team in Spain recommended was to remove the grid and to make that feel very much more on the sort of arts and less formalized learning, and keeping it really in that pre-primary stage.
Great. Any other question? Anyone wants to say something? No? Okay, so just to say you that all of you, thank you very much for being here. Thanks, Angelica and Sheena, for your excellent presentation. We have enjoyed it very much. We are part of the Red Alexi, which is the Spanish network for teaching foreign languages in pre-primary education. I leave you the link here just in case you are not a member of our network and you want to become a member so that you are more updated with all the activities we